Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're doing well today. We're going to continue on in our discussion about how energy moves through ecosystems by moving on from food chains and food webs to talking about something called energy pyramids. And so, as a part of this, we're going to take a look at essentially what we've looked at to this point is how food chains and food webs are a way of modeling or diagramming how energy flows through an ecosystem. And so, in this particular lesson, we're going to look at how energy pyramids can diagram the flow of energy through an ecosystem. So our essential question we're looking at here is how is the flow of energy through an energy pyramid diagrammed? So let's start by taking a look at uh, the energy in a living system. Of course, we hopefully already realize that all living things need energy. Once living things stop using energy, they die. So all living things need energy and use energy. And this energy that living things use is made by plants through the process of photosynthesis, where light energy and carbon dioxide and water are transformed in the plant through chemical processes into sugar and oxygen and water. Um, and that sugar is the energy that both the plant needs and that other organisms need in order to survive. The animal gets that energy when it eats the plant or eats something that has eaten the plant, because the organism then transfers the energy to the next organism which eats it, and it is a continual process, so it goes on and on and on. We have talked about the fact that food chains, however, cannot go on and on forever, because eventually the amount of energy that's being passed on is so small. So, an energy pyramid is essentially a graphic representation of this system. All right, it uses a diagram as opposed to a picture. And like a food chain uses pictures, it uses a diagram in order to show this process. So how is it organized? Well, it's organized into things that we call trophic levels. In some places you'll hear them called trophic levels, but it's organized into trophic levels. The feeding position in a food chain or an energy pyramid uh, that an organism occupies based on what it eats, that is the definition of a trophic level. Okay. So where an organism gets placed, which trophic level it gets placed in on the energy pyramid, all depends upon what it eats. Energy decreases the higher we get on the energy pyramid. So it decreases from lower to higher trophic levels. So the higher you go in the energy pyramid, the less, on the energy pyramid, the less energy that is left. Biomass, which is basically the matter or the stuff that makes up living things. It's what you're made of. It's what plants are made of. It's what animals are made of. We call that biomass. So bio, of course, means living. Mass has to do with matter. Okay, it is so mass is what everything is made up of, atoms and all of that sort of thing. So biomass also decreases from lower to higher trophic levels. So there is a lot more living matter at the bottom of the pyramid than there is at the higher levels of the pyramid. In other words, as we'll see in a moment, producers, as you can see kind of in the picture here, are at the bottom of an energy pyramid. You have your apex predators at the top. Again, we'll talk about this more in a few minutes. You have many, 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 many more producers in an ecosystem than you do apex predators. So there's a lot more biomass at the bottom. All right, let's take a look at the different trophic levels here. So the very first trophic level is made up of producers, always. Just like the first step in a food chain is a producer, same with an energy pyramid. They are the ones getting the energy from the sun and making the sun's energy useful to all other organisms in the ecosystem. They make their own food through a process called photosynthesis. We've talked about that before. And so we've got a new vocabulary word that we can use um, with producers, and that vocabulary word is autotroph. Autotroph means that it makes its own food. So producers are also known as autotrophs. All right. Then we get to the consumers. The consumers make up all the other levels, all the other trophic levels of the energy pyramid. They are not able to make their own food. They depend on getting their food either from plants or from other animals, right? They cannot get energy directly from the sun the way the producer can. So it is dependent upon either eating producers or eating things that eat producers. So they are known as heterotrophs. Heterotroph is a word that means an organism that cannot make its own food. All right. So autotrophs can make their own food. Those are producers. Heterotrophs cannot make their own food. They are consumers. They have to eat other things like plants and animals. Let's take a look at the primary consumers. They are the first ones to consume in an energy pyramid, right? Because the first trophic level is producers. And so the primary consumers are the first consumers in the energy pyramid. They are herbivores. They are not able to make their own food. They are consumers, so they consume plants. They eat plants. Because they can't make their own food, they of course are heterotrophs, because all consumers are heterotrophs. Secondary and tertiary consumers are in the third and fourth trophic levels. They eat primary consumers. They also eat each other. And some of them also do eat producers because there are omnivores in these levels, but a lot of them are carnivores, which means that they eat only other animals. They are not, however, all carnivores. There are some omnivores in those levels as well. They are, however, heterotrophs because, again, all consumers are heterotrophs. Heterotroph simply means it can't make its own food. Consumer also means that it can't make its own food. So all consumers are heterotrophs. Let's take a look at the very top of a food pyramid. Now, not energy pyramid, excuse me. Not all energy pyramids have the exact same number of levels to them. It all depends on the environment and what animals and organisms we're taking a look at. So sometimes you may only have 3 levels total. You may only have 4 levels. You may have 5, 6, or 7. Not typically going to have any more than that. But here again, we see our quaternary consumers, that fourth level of consumers, which in this pyramid is the fifth trophic level, because the first trophic level is producers. And so the quaternary consumers are typically our apex predators. Okay, whatever is at the top of the food pyramid, no matter which level you are at, those are the apex predators. They are kind of the top of the food chain, we might say. They are the animals that in the ecosystem that nothing else preys on them. Okay, there is nothing else that they are a predator for, uh, or is a predator for them, excuse me. They almost always are carnivores. Occasionally you will have apex predators that are omnivores, but most often they tend to be just carnivores. And of course, because they are consumers, they are heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are consumers, they cannot make their own food. Then, of course, you have the decomposers. Well, decomposers are, of course, the garbage man, so to speak, of the ecosystems. If we didn't have decomposers, we would have essentially dead bodies covering the earth. There would be layers and layers and layers of them. But we have decomposers that break down all of those dead plants and animals. Um, and they are active at every level of the pyramid because all organisms eventually die. And so the decomposers are the ones that then consume those dead plants and animals and break them down into smaller parts that can then become part of the environment again. So they return the nutrients back into the environment as they break down those dead organisms. We use a pyramid shape for an energy pyramid for a particular reason. And that is to be able to show how much useful energy there is at each level of, uh, of an ecosystem. So the amount of energy available decreases as we go up the energy pyramid. And so we have the larger part, the producers take up the larger part at the bottom because they have the most amount of energy. Your apex predators have the least amount of energy available. And so they are at the top or the smallest part of the pyramid. As it happens, that also matches up with how it works with biomass. So not just the energy, but also the matter that makes up this ecosystem. There is much more biomass at the lower trophic levels than there are at the higher trophic levels. So many, many more producers than there are apex predators. So let's take a look at what this means. How does the energy flow? Well, so if we assume that the primary producers have basically 100% of the energy available, it is about 10% that goes to the next level when let's say, a primary consumer eats a producer. They receive about 10% of the energy that that producer had. Energy is measured in something called kilocalories. Or sometimes we call them joules. So it's just two different units of measurement for energy, kind of like we can talk about like meters, or we can talk about feet or something in measuring distance. In this case, with energy, we can measure it in kilocalories or we can measure it in joules. Just in case you were wondering, you don't really need to memorize this at this point. Maybe someday you will, depending on what kind of sciences you decide to study later on. But just so you know, 1 kilocalorie is the same as 4,184 joules. But let's take a look at the pyramid over here on the right-hand side for just a moment. Again, you can see that as we go up the pyramid, if we start with 100% of the energy in the first trophic level, then the next trophic level only ends up with 10% of that energy. The next trophic level with 1% of the original energy amount of energy, and the the fourth trophic level, the tertiary consumer, would end up with 0.1% of the original amount of energy that the producers had. So you can see it decreases quite drastically. All right, I'm not going to have you get with a partner here at this moment, but let's take a look at this diagram for just a moment and see if we can't uh, explain what happens here at each trophic level. So let's see if I can get my pen to work here. Oops, maybe. We'll see. All right, so if we start with 1,000 joules of energy down here at the first trophic level, and only 10% of it moves to the next trophic level. In order to figure out 10%, all we have to do is take our little imaginary decimal point, which is right here, and we're going to move that over one place to the left. So that means we now have 100 joules of energy at the next trophic level. At the trophic level above that, they only get 10 joules of energy. And at the trophic level above that, they would only get 1 joule of energy if we started with 1,000 at the first trophic level. If we were to do it with 5,500 joules instead, so let's say down here we've got 5,500 joules of energy instead of 1,000 joules. Again, to figure out what 10% of that is, we just move the decimal place over one spot. And so that means we would have 550 joules of energy at the next trophic level. The next trophic level would then have 55. And again, if we move that decimal over one place, then at the top trophic level, we would end up with 5.5 joules of energy. All right. So where does this energy go? Why is it that that energy seems to be lost, so to speak? Well, the fact is, and we'll talk about this more in 8th grade science, but the fact is that energy cannot be destroyed. It just gets used and changed into other forms. So when we're talking about energy moving from one organism or from one trophic level to the next, essentially what we are saying is that um, useful energy. It's 10% of the useful energy that is moving along. So energy gets used up by organisms at each level through what we call metabolic processes. Those are the processes that keep you alive, right? You've heard the word metabolism maybe in the past. Your metabolism is what keeps you going, what keeps your body working. And so you do all kinds of metabolic processes every day, whether it be running or eating, escaping danger, finding mates, heart beating, breathing, making new cells. All of these are a part of daily living. Okay. So all of these are the metabolic processes that various organisms go through, whether it's human or animal or plant. They go through these processes and it uses energy when they do that. A lot of that energy is given off into the environment in the form of heat. When you run, your body heats up. Your body can't continue to heat up or you will die. And so that heat has to escape your body and it goes out into the environment. And so that is how energy is quote unquote lost. It's not lost, it just changes forms and becomes a form that is not useful for the next organism to use in their metabolic processes, in their processes of staying alive. The consumers at the top of the food pyramid have much less energy available to support them than those at the bottom, and that's why there are fewer of them. There is not enough energy in the things that they eat in order for there to be a lot of them. And so eventually the amount of useful energy left cannot support another level. And that is why there are rarely more than 4 trophic levels. You can get up higher, but more commonly there are somewhere around 3 to 5 trophic levels, somewhere around 4. All right, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully you have a better understanding of how we can use energy pyramids to show how energy flows through an ecosystem. Please write down 2 questions that you may have still about energy and its movement through an ecosystem at the end of your notes. Thank you. Have a great day, guys.